Hey Charles, as always, great to see you. And thanks for giving us a bit of time to come and have a chat with us about what you're doing. So I'll tell you how I'd like to start today. I know you've had a number of quite a few businesses in the past. Tell us about, just to start with, tell us about the moment when you thought this business could go global. I mean, just tell us about that moment.
Well, that's interesting because I remember that moment perfectly.
Right.
I walked out of a meeting in Madrid with a client of mine who operated dozens of loyalty programs in the world. At that time, they were probably the largest operator of loyalty programs on a global basis. And I walked out of that meeting thinking this business is at the end of its useful life, in part because they were extracting too much value out of the loyalty ecosystem. So not
Yeah.
enough value was flowing through to consumers. And so I walked down the street into a shopping center, sat down in a restaurant, ordered a beer, and grabbed a few napkins. And I started defining what I thought the next generation loyalty solution would look like.
Right.
And so not only did I design, yeah, I mean, in a 2 hour period, I kind of designed the service offering that we would come up with, but also the guiding principles for the business that I would like to run to deliver those services. And so certain things were, the business had to be global from the beginning. I defined that I never wanted to have more than 20 people in the company.
Mhm.
And at that time, I was assuming half of them would be accountants because the business is related to transacting in loyalty
Yeah.
currencies. And so we would be managing a lot of economic value flowing between different brands. In the end, we've not ended up with very many accountants at all because the technology takes care of that for us. But anyway, a guiding principle was never more than 20 employees. I thought that the employees would be spread throughout Europe, not necessarily on a global basis, but I expected most of the developers to come from Eastern Europe. I expected that we would have business development people in Asia Pacific, North America. I would probably take care of Europe and Middle East. In the end, I've tried having business development people in Asia and North America, and it has not worked that well.
Right.
And so they no longer work for us. But anyway, I defined a bunch of guiding principles of the business, and I would say that 70% of those guiding principles we've honored throughout the 10 years
Wow.
since Currency Alliance was created. A couple we've had to adapt to. We pivoted a portion of our business model, to be more relevant on a business to business basis. Um, but overall, I mean, I guess I've had enough experience,
Yeah.
creating businesses or working with other people in their businesses that I knew what I liked and I knew what I didn't like.
Yeah.
So we steered clear of, things that I thought would be onerous, at least at this stage in my life, because I'm in my 60s now. And there were certain things I just didn't want to deal with at this age.
Sure, sure. So you decided that this was going to be a global business. How did you then go about saying, okay, I've written this down on a napkin. How am I going to turn this into reality? I mean, how did you approach the process of building the business? I mean, just walk us through that.
The first thing I did is I contacted the chief innovation officer for the company that of the meeting that I had walked out of.
Uh-huh.
And I told him, I think your business is at the end of its useful life, and you should hire me. In fact, I told them they should pay me 30,000 euros to write a business plan for the next generation loyalty
Right.
solution.
Right. Okay.
And they agreed to do that. So then I spent 6 months um, spending a bit of their money, some of my own money, studying the industry because I was not an expert in the loyalty industry. And I still don't profess to be an expert in the loyalty industry. But the point was, I read everything I could get my hands on. I started building a network of contacts in the industry that could help accelerate my learning. I benchmarked uh, 200 of the largest loyalty programs in the world
Wow.
by reviewing their financial statements, um, trying to figure out how they sold points, enabled points to be exchanged or whatever. And so I basically dedicated 6 months because I also had reached a stage of maturity where I didn't want to dedicate the next 2 or 3 or 4 years of my life to something that couldn't be viable and
Yeah.
scalable on a global basis. And anyway, so after 3 months of that time, I delivered this document to the client and they never talked to me again. And I think it's because they were a publicly traded company. And if the document that I wrote were to see the, light of day,
Yeah.
their stock price could tank. In the end, 2 years later, they went bankrupt. And I think it's for most of the same reasons. So anyway, that client never spoke to me again. So after they didn't talk to me again, I'm like, well, if they're not going to build this, based on my recommendations, I'm going to build it. So then I started putting together a business plan. I wrote a 2-page executive summary and I sent it to 10 people in my network. Mostly were investors that had made money with me in the past. And so they knew me, they trusted
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
5 of them invested based on the 2-page executive summary. I think 3 or 4 of them asked for additional information, which I provided. In the end, 3 of them invested. And then I invited 2 or 3 more investors to participate. And I got to 10 investors putting in 20,000 euros each. So I raised 200,000 euros based mostly on a 2-page executive summary. And within a month or two, we started writing software to build our technology platform. So anyway, I raised 200,000 in a first round from people that knew me. And and then after 6 or 7 months, I realized that we needed to change our business model a little bit. And I don't think the purpose of your discussions are to go into a lot of detail, so I won't. Um, but we became much more of a B2B technology services company as opposed to B2B and B2B2C.
Yeah.
And by avoiding the B2B2C, we eliminated a lot of the potential conflict where our target clients thought we were partly competing with their own business. Um, but today we work with 22 or 23 banks, but big banks like Bank of America, TD
Yeah.
Bank of Canada, First Abu Dhabi Bank is the largest bank in the Middle East, HSBC. We work with 42 or 43 airlines where they use our technology to collaborate with partners. Almost all the large hotel groups use our technology. Ticketmaster uses our technology. So if you wanted to redeem loyalty points for a Taylor Swift concert ticket, we would process that transaction.
Right.
But we became a pure B2B technology company, and that was really important. Um, yeah, so the first 2 or 3 years, we might have only had 4 clients at the end of 3 years. But after we adjusted the business model and focused much more on B2B, then by 2018, 2019, we started scaling quite nicely. And the last 4 years, we've grown more than 400% each
Wow.
year.
Wow. That
And
is impressive.
network effects have kicked in.
Yeah.
And so our business development effort has gone down dramatically because now we spend more time choosing which clients we can onboard as a priority as opposed to outbound marketing and sales. So
Sure.
anyway,
And, and I mean, you touched on this idea about building a global business with a small team. I mean, how do you, how, I mean, and I know you've been the CEO of multiple companies, but how do you see the role of the CEO in that setting? You know, when you've only got a relatively small team, but you're attempting to build something that is pretty big in terms of a footprint. I mean, how do you see the role of the CEO in that context?
yeah, in this case, I mean, first of all, a lot of employee type people are not visionary by nature. So they need to be guided with a clear vision and reinforcement of priorities on a regular basis. So it's kind of been my role as a CEO to maintain this global vision, define, which markets we're going to focus on next, and try to shelter the rest of the team from all the chaos that takes
Yeah,
place. The,
yeah,
successes or the failures or negative feedback or whatever, so that they can focus on their own job. So today we have about 10 employees, And but like I said, we've grown more than 400% each of the last 4 years, and we've only added one full-time equivalent in all that time. And it's because the technology works, and the technology reaches every corner of the world. Um, so the role of the CEO, I think, is to have a clear vision, define priorities, let the team get on with what they can do, limit their exposure to the chaos that takes place in a
Yeah.
business, um, limit their exposure to feedback that we receive from many sources, because you need to listen to feedback, but you have to have a good filter
Yeah.
deciding which feedback is relevant and which feedback is a distraction. And so I've really tried to protect them as much as anything and just let them get on with their work. And I will say that many of my ideas at the beginning, and I'm not going to say they were bad, but they weren't necessarily aligned with the requirements of the market or our clients' goals and objectives. So we built technology that only now, after 8, 9, 10 years, is starting to get used.
Mm.
And maybe that's because we were a little bit ahead of our time in how the industry ought to operate. But we built some technology that hadn't been used for quite a long time, and now it's starting to get used. We have a few features that have never been used.
Right.
But anyway, somebody has to come up with a vision.
Sure.
And I guess that's the role of the CEO.
Sure. And how do you, I mean, one of the interesting issues is that, I mean, the markets change very quickly, don't they? Particularly in relation to competition. I mean, because technology is moving so quickly, competitors come and go. I mean, how do you, in terms of your job as the CEO, how do you make sure that you're staying ahead of the competition? I mean, how do you do it? Do you worry a lot about the competition, or just focus on what customers are saying? I mean, what's your take on that issue about staying in front of the others?
Yeah, I would say there are certain industries that transform and evolve much more rapidly than others. So financial services is one that is remarkably fast.
Yeah.
And during the last 10 years, we've had the introduction of blockchain and um, various other technologies that um, have really transformed the way financial services operate. In our case, Currency Alliance, my current company, is a fintech company
Mhm.
operating in the loyalty space. And what's unique about us is we recognize that loyalty points were an asset class. And I can't profess to be the first person to have claimed that loyalty points are an asset class, but I recognize it as loyalty points is a unit of measure,
Yeah.
which has an economic value because you can redeem points for products and services. And so we've always behaved like a fintech company and adopted best practices from the fintech industry, while the industry that we work in, loyalty, which is part of broader marketing, is a little bit slower moving industry.
Right.
And so many of the current loyalty programs are still operated similar to the way they were 10 years ago or even 20 years ago. And so we are much more agile and responsive in a relatively slow moving industry. Um, so in terms of competition, there were two companies that do things similar to us that had been created 10 years earlier.
Right.
And so they were already well established. So I was able to gain some insights by observing, how they had grown their business, how they were operating and serving clients. But we wanted to do things in a very different way. So we have two competitors, but we have very different business models. And and our business model is based very much on self-service. So we want our clients to be able to serve themselves and not be dependent on us to respond to whatever new requirements they might have. And we also charge a transaction fee. So we only make money when our clients are making money. Our competitors tend to charge significant fees for
Okay.
setting up new clients. So we've had some other threats of new competitors entering the space. But one of the things I did it very early on is I defined our revenue model in a way where our fees were so small that it made the industry look unattractive to potential new competitors.
Okay.
Um, And so we've had a couple companies enter the space. They've all disappeared. One is still lingering a little bit,
Mhm.
but we've made our costs so low that it's unattractive for new competitors to enter our space. Um, and whether that was the right decision or not, we'll find out in the medium to long term. But anyway, I didn't want to deal with a lot of competition.
Sure. Yeah,
So
I certainly get the logic of that. I mean, you mentioned about the team. I mean, one of the interesting challenges about having a small team building a big global footprint is is how do you get that team? How do you work with that team to optimize their performance to make sure that they're performing at at a high? I mean, you haven't got a lot of slack, have you? So how do you make sure that the team is performing? How do you make sure it's a high performing team, if you like, on an ongoing basis? I mean, because that must, I guess the responsibility for that must fall to you, I would have thought. Is that right?
well, they did for the first 4 years of the company. And then, and my original co-founder was an entrepreneur, technology guy who had made a decent amount of money in one of Spain's very first really successful technology companies.
Right.
And when he left that business, he decided to create a bit like an incubator where he would, work on projects for clients, but he would also work on his own project ideas. And so over time, he had accumulated, I think, 40 or 50 technology specialists in his company, and they were all working on his own projects or maybe a few client projects. And so when we created Currency Alliance, I was able to tap into two of those professionals already on his team. So they already knew his business culture. They knew their development environment. They had a methodology. So we didn't have to teach people from scratch. And so I relied on my co-founder to sort of manage that part of the business during the first 2 or 3 years. And then I gradually started assuming more responsibility for providing guidance to the technology development. And then I got super lucky about 6 years ago. We had posted a job position for kind of a head of product development. Um, and I interviewed a number of people, but in the end, I hired a guy who had come to Barcelona to get an MBA at ESA Business School. And he had just sold a technology company related to artificial intelligence and
Mhm.
fashion design. And so he was looking for his next challenge. And we met, we talked about our business, and he really liked the fintech approach to managing loyalty currencies. So a little more than 5 years ago now, he joined my team, and he's been the best professional that I've ever worked with.
Wow.
He's just an amazing professional.
And
And
what is it that makes him so good? I mean, just tell us. I mean, it's very interesting. Sometimes it's hard to tell whether when you recruit people whether they're going to, whether they are going to deliver the kind of promise. I mean, tell me what is it about him that makes him so good?
yeah, I mean, I've hired 100 people in my life. And I've been happy with 25 of them and disappointed with 75.
Yeah.
So you're
Yeah.
absolutely right. Hiring requires a lot of discipline in the process if you want to reduce your odds of getting the wrong people. But in this case, I think I was a bit lucky because I think I knew he was a good professional. I knew he was entrepreneurial. I knew that he understood product management, product design. What I did not know is how much job ownership he would take in serving clients, in learning our own technology, because he's not a programmer, but he has become very, very knowledgeable about the technical architecture of our platform, security requirements, technical architecture, all of that. And so he's just has so much job ownership that he's kind of challenged himself
Mhm.
to dig into the details, in part so he can hold his own team accountable and not be,
Okay.
you know, um, misled by their recommendations. But also, I think personally, he just is very interested in the technology, and he completely agrees with my philosophy that the most successful companies, the ones that are most responsive to their clients,
Yeah.
not necessarily the ones with the best product. And and so we live by a philosophy that we will respond to clients, quickly, no matter what their requirement is. Um, because almost all other technology companies might respond in 2 or 3 days or in a week or in 2 weeks. And every change requires a change request, and there's all this bureaucracy involved. And we don't do any of that. We just serve clients.
And have you been able to inculcate that culture across your team, or is it just him that's very focused that way? I mean, is that something that is part of how you do business?
I would say that most of the weight falls on this vice president of product and operations and myself, because again, we still try to shield most of our team from our clients. Um, some of our other team members do interact with clients, but that's not their forte. And so we've just hired a new person who's a little bit more customer facing, but also with years of experience building out technical architectures. And so as we look to 2026, maybe this requires a little more context, but in the last 5 years, we've been very focused on adding brands and logos
Right.
to our
Yeah.
platform because that brings a lot of credibility. It brings transaction volume, so we make some money. But we see that our clients are leaving a lot of money on the table because they're not optimizing the way they drive engagement with their customers. And so in 2026, we're going to refocus our strategy from just growing as quickly as possible to helping our existing clients drive better engagement with their customers
Okay.
and not leave money on the table. So basically, we're shifting to a customer or client success or customer success
Yeah.
strategy. And so this hire of the person that will join May 1st will help position us so that our deeper technical skills can also talk directly to clients. But we're also sort of educating our team in how they should respond to clients, how they should try to understand what the real question is, even if that's not clear in the
Sure.
stated question. Like what's the real goal or objective, and how do we solve that problem? But anyway, our strategy will shift next year, maybe even by the end of this year, in order to focus much more on customer success, because I think our clients can make a lot more money from the
Sure.
activities that they're pursuing. And the byproduct is we'll make more money from that as well
Sure.
without having to onboard more and more clients.
Sure. And I mean, you mentioned the change in strategy. I mean, how do you work with the team to deal with those kind of changes? Because a change in strategy often requires a shift in thinking, doesn't it? About why we're doing things. I mean, how do you help the team adapt to that? And also, the other thing that's kind of related to the change question is about dealing with failure when things go wrong or when people do things wrong. I mean, what are your take on those issues?
Yeah, so let's deal with the second one first. I mean, when there are failures, it can cost us a lot of money.
Yeah.
So we've had instances where we processed transactions more than once, sometimes because the memory in our server isn't working correctly, so we're not receiving the reply back from an API call to a client or whatever. And so we'll process a transaction a second or a third time. And fortunately, our clients are forgiving, and so they'll back out those transactions in their system. So it's never cost us any money so far, knock wood. But I mean, some of these transactions could cost us hundreds or thousands of euros, and this is related to errors that are introduced into the production environment where we didn't do enough testing. So we make sure everybody understands the financial implications of the software they're releasing into production, and therefore, hopefully, they're more motivated to do thorough testing. And I'm happy to say that I think in general we do quite a good job,
Right.
but we have had incidents like that. The second dimension of your question is, how much should they be involved in transformation or change in strategy? And I actually think it's a nice idea that everybody's on board with a change in strategy, but the reality is most people don't care,
Yeah.
especially depending on the role that they have. And so again, I try to shelter them from the implications of changing strategy and just let them get on with their job because they're either not interested or they can't understand it in some cases. And we have really smart people, but they're really smart at certain things. And I like to keep them focused on the things that they're good at, as opposed to getting distracted with change per se.
Sure. So, I mean, let me just ask you about, because you're working in lots and lots of different jurisdictions. I mean, give us your thoughts on going into new markets. I mean, let's say for the sake of argument, you were going to start doing stuff with companies in Latin America or something. I mean, how would you approach the kind of market entry question? Give us your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so you mentioned Latin America. So let me use that as an example and also North America. I'm from the United States, so I know the culture in the United States. I know the buying process. Most of the loyalty programs in the United States are much more evolved and sophisticated than anywhere else in the world. And so we initially focused very much on North America. And nobody was very interested in our technology. United Airlines, American Airlines, Delta, Hilton, um, because they felt like they were already, world beaters and they could do whatever they want and everything would be great. And so we just were not making very good progress in North America. So I stopped focusing on the market that I know the best. In Latin America, we also, tried pursuing Aerolíneas Argentinas, LATAM, various other airlines and hotel groups in Latin America. And we found that their degree of bureaucracy was such that even if they understood the benefits of our technology, they couldn't get things done. They couldn't get things implemented. No offense to those companies, because now they're starting to recognize the importance
Mm.
of this innovation, and we're now working with many. But basically, we also ran into a brick wall in Latin America, 8 or 9 years ago or 7 years ago. So we started to focus on Europe and the Middle East. And we found in the Middle East that companies were really embracing loyalty marketing as a discipline and launching many new loyalty programs. They were much more open to collaboration with partner brands. And so we started getting a lot of traction in the Middle East. We then started getting some traction in Europe. And then about 5 years ago, Asia kind of woke up
Right.
and recognized the importance of loyalty marketing. And now we're extremely busy in Southeast Asia. Uh, and so we tested, we probed markets to see what
Yeah.
their responsiveness was to our technology. Um, and after getting doors slammed in our face in North America for so long, or not making progress in Latin America, we focused on the markets where we were getting traction. And now all of a sudden, North America has woken up and realized that largely because of security,
Mm.
they need a technology like ours because they don't want to be doing 20 or 30 or 40 API integrations with individual partners, or the setup costs are so high that, the return on investment, is negative. And so now we're getting good traction in North America and South America, but we had to wait
Mm.
because you can't change a market when you're a startup. You
No.
have to just be in the right place at the right time, and you have to have the staying power to still exist when the market opportunities present themselves.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a great believer that you make progress where you can make progress. It's very, very simplistic, really, but I think that's absolutely right. And I mean, you talked about finding partners that you want to work with. I mean, give us a sense of your ideas about deal making. I hate to use Trump's phrase about the art of the deal, but obviously partnering with other organizations absolutely critical in lots of circumstances. I mean, how do you go about reaching a deal with people?
Yeah, so that question kind of has two sides of the answer. One is, you know, reaching a deal with a client who's a paying client, and so they're basically using our technology. And in those cases, because we set our pricing so low, and many of them also had experience working with our competitors, pricing was never
Right.
a point of friction. Um, Getting them to embrace our self-service technology platform required a little bit of education, but usually within one demo or maybe two demos, we can get them on board that they see the benefits in using our technology and managing their partnerships themselves. So we really never had any problem reaching a deal with a client.
Mm.
In some cases, we have had problems with certain airlines or hotel groups or banks in creating a deal, but it's because they didn't believe in our technology or they
Right.
wanted to control everything themselves. So sometimes the analogy might be, any startup today doesn't create a new word processor or build their own data center in order to go into business,
Mm.
because you can rent those services from third parties. And the same philosophy exists in loyalty. I mean, historically, everybody had to build similar technology to what we offer. But what's the point today? If you can rent the technology and you only pay as you're generating more benefits, then it's a win-win for everybody. And so, but some organizations are still opposed to that. They want to control everything. The other side of the partnership question is, how do we develop partnerships with complementary brands,
Mm.
and especially complementary technology companies within the loyalty space? And I would say that all of the loyalty solutions in the market have an interface for partners to generate earning
Yeah.
transactions or redemption transactions. But those are always an afterthought for their business, because what they really want to do is they want to, control the customer profiling and messaging and all the loyalty points transactions. And so the partner collaboration piece was, never part of their core focus. And therefore that functionality is quite weak in most of
Right.
those systems. And so we do partner with most of the leading loyalty system manufacturers in the world, because we demonstrate that we're a purpose-built extension of their technology to allow their technology to be more effective in their client
Okay.
environments.
Okay.
And so again, we're kind of aligned with them. And not all companies embrace us as a value-added extension of their technology, but many do. And anyway, so that probably occupies 20% of my time, is building these, channel partnerships
Yeah.
that allow us to go to market more effectively. But importantly, it allows each of them to differentiate their service
Yeah.
in their own competitive environments.
Sure. And you mentioned risk earlier on. I mean, what are the things? I mean, one of the things that strikes me about the CEOs, I mean, I call it not chief executive officer, but chief everything officer until you've got a huge number of staff. Because when you're small, you end up having to deal with lots and lots of stuff that other people perhaps wouldn't. I mean, what are the risks sort of stuff? What are the things that keep you awake at night? Because there's a lot you've got a lot on your plate, haven't you? Multiple jurisdictions, staff, technology issues. I mean, what are the things that keep you awake at night, and how do you keep track of all that stuff?
Yeah. I mean, first of all, the biggest risks in our business, I probably don't know yet. And so, the unknown,
Yeah.
is probably the thing that's most concerning to me. As I alluded to earlier, I mean, sometimes we process transactions more than once, or sometimes we might not process a transaction, and that has a financial impact
Mm.
on our clients. But in loyalty programs, you might earn points in a program for a year or two, and then eventually you want to redeem for a free flight or a free hotel or
Mm.
an iPad or something. But you're not spending points or earning points every day. And so when a mistake takes place, if we can isolate the mistake, find the root cause and fix it, then we can usually adjust the transaction so that nobody's harmed.
Yeah.
Um, but if we were trading in stocks and bonds or foreign exchange or wire transfers, the risk would be much, much higher, because, if you send the money to the wrong person, they're probably going to keep it, or they're going to try and keep it. Um, and so anyway, we're in a niche market where exposure to risk is not that great, um, partly by design, because we'd have to do a lot more testing if we were sending money, fiat currency, around the world. But transacting in loyalty currencies is something where most people aren't overly concerned or even aware of what's going on. And so there is the opportunity to fix mistakes. And therefore, I don't actually lose much sleep at night. Um, and maybe 8 years ago, when we were getting into this business, I anticipated losing more sleep. But as we've worked with our clients and partners, we've discovered that they have bigger problems in other parts of their business, and we're actually reducing the pain that
Yeah.
they experience in a certain part of the business. So when we do make a mistake, they're very happy to work with us to fix it.
Yeah. Yeah. And when you look back on the journey, I mean, you've obviously, I mean, I know this is your 12th business, so you've been around this loop a few times before, but when you look back on the journey that you've been on, I mean, what would you say you've learned from it? I mean, what impact has it had on you?
Well, first of all, um, in business to consumer businesses, my natural optimism um, might pan out, meaning that my belief that we can grow quickly would actually materialize because you can often get consumers to engage with a product very quickly. In business to business, especially business to business technology companies, it takes years to build credibility
Yeah.
in order to sell something. And most companies expect a startup to go bankrupt within 3 or 4 years. And
Yeah.
so they don't want to do business with you during the
Yeah.
first 2 or 3 years because they don't think you're going to be around in the fourth year. And so you have to have staying power. Uh, so in our case, we consciously decided to be very capital efficient from the beginning because we thought it's going to take 3 or 4 years to build credibility in the industry, build some brand name recognition, establish contacts on a global basis before we could start actually closing any deals. And so during that period of time, I hired just two technology developers to build out modules of our product on a kind of 3 year, 4 year roadmap. Because I didn't expect that if they could build the technology faster, we'd be able to sell it faster. Because until you have credibility and contacts
Mm.
and you go through the sales cycle, you're just not going to close any business. And so we kind of triangulated this idea where we'd have software development taking place, we'd be building credibility through thought leadership articles, we'd be meeting contacts through LinkedIn and attending conferences, and everything would start to come together in the fourth or fifth year. And we burnt very little cash across all of those disciplines because we had to have the staying power to exist in the fifth, sixth, and seventh year to harvest the seeds that we'd planted. And that more or less worked out as
Right.
anticipated. And so it
Okay.
was in the fifth and sixth year that we started growing exponentially. The product was quite mature by that stage. We had good contacts in the industry. We were recognized for our thought leadership, and things just started clicking. And then in the seventh and eighth year, network effects started kicking in where we would introduce a client to Air France KLM, and then Air France KLM would introduce us to someone else. And then the client that was working with Air France KLM would start working with
Yeah.
Qatar Airways or Vietnam Airlines or whatever. And so now that the network effects have kicked in, um, I can foresee our growth during the next 2 years quite clearly, but that was not the case 5 years ago.
No. And it's a very interesting point you make about this thing about credibility, because people think that it's all about having a great product. When you hear a lot of stuff at the moment about product led growth, and I mean that's fine, but customers often look at startups, don't they, as you've just pointed out, and think, will they be here? Will they be here in 4 years' time? And if they don't believe that you are, that will have a negative impact on whether they're going to buy or not. I mean, it's a really interesting point that you've made there. I mean, just looking back, um, if you were to start again, if you were to go right back to the beginning, knowing what you know now, I mean, what one piece of advice would you give yourself if you were back at square one?
Well, probably set better expectations with our investors. I have
Right.
very
Okay.
patient investors, and a number of them have very deep pockets, so they've been willing to fund us. We've never done a Series A, but we've done 7 seed rounds.
Right.
And And I think I was too optimistic at the beginning about what our growth rate would be, what our revenue would be when we would reach cash flow positive. And I wish I had set better expectations with the investors because I think the investors would still have invested. Um, but I wouldn't feel guilty,
Yeah,
telling them, "Hey, we missed our numbers again this year." Um, and in the end, they're all going to be happy. But many of them knew me from previous businesses.
yeah,
They knew I was trustworthy. And I put a fair amount of my own money in this business. And I think that's a very strong signal
yeah,
to investors when you're putting your own money in, and not just 2,000 euros, but 200 or 400,000 euros of your own money. Um, then they're increasingly confident that
yeah,
you wouldn't waste your own money on a bad idea. Um, And then certainly I learned lessons on business development. We did spend a little too much money on business development in year two and year three. I wish I had that money back, because we really needed to wait until the third and
yeah,
fourth year.
yeah,
So anyway, there are lessons learned. So few hundred thousand euros were spent on things that I wouldn't do again.
yeah.
Um, but overall, I think the path we chose has been the right one, and it's starting to prove itself.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean it's a success. So I mean you've obviously done something right. So I mean it's very interesting your point there about being patient. There, I mean I certainly have got I'm always wanting to press ahead, and sometimes it is better just to stand back and say, okay, I maybe need to wait 6 months or a year before doing this. But it's really hard to do that. So Charles, thank you for sharing that story. I mean fascinating and very insightful actually. So I really appreciate you making time to come and have a chat with us, and thank you again for sharing the story. And I know you've got plans to go and run a farm after you've finished this gig, and I hope that goes well too.
Well, thank you, Paul. I would say, I mean, I grew up in a farming community and I've spent 35 years in technology, and now I'm kind of looking forward to getting my hands dirty again in sort of the later years of my life. But running a farm requires innovation, project
Yeah,
management,
yeah,
vision, all the things that you learn in other businesses. But you also need patience and thick skin because you can't control the
yeah,
weather. Um, you can influence how you use the water, that falls from the sky and not waste it, which is kind of like capital
yeah,
that comes
yeah,
into a
yeah,
business. So there are some similarities, but anyway, I do look forward to getting my hands dirty again.
yeah. And I'm sure you'll have great fun. Charles, good to see you.
Indeed, Paul, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Cheers. Bye bye.